Hi everyone, Crista Cowan here with another episode of The Barefoot Genealogist. It is our last broadcast of 2012, and I have to tell you, I'm actually snowed in at my house. I could get out of my driveway, but there was no way I was getting off of my street. So we're running on a wireless internet connection, and hopefully I'll try to keep my eye on my streaming indicator, but hopefully we won't have too many audio or video problems. And if we do, just be patient with me. I may have to stop and start a couple of times. Today we are talking about writing down our family history, and I'm just going to share with you a couple of tips for recording your family history, some things that I do that help me keep on top of that. So with that introduction, let's dive in. One of the things that I do that I would recommend that all of you do is I write as I go. Now, some of you may not be writing at all, and so I would encourage you to write. But as you discover new things, as you uncover your family history, as you find a certain document, take the time to just do a little bit of writing. It's a habit that if you get into, you'll discover that your writing improves, but you'll also discover that you learn more about your family when you take the time to do that. So one of the things that I highly recommend, and if you've seen any of my shows, you've probably heard me talk about this before, is the idea of once you attach a document that you found, transcribe that document. Now, actually take the time to read everything on it and to write up something about it. Here's what this looks like in my family tree. So if I come here to my great-grandfather and I pull up the notes that I've written for him, here's what you're going to see. And if you can't see this real clearly, go ahead and make your screen full size. There should be a little full screen button in the middle of your live stream viewing window. Here is just, for example, the 1910 census. I found the 1910 census, and I have actually transcribed everything that I could read off of that document. So, for example, I listed the exact place he was living, how his name was written on that document, how old he was, where he was born, where his parents were born, his occupation, the fact that he rented his farm. Oh, look, I love when I discover my own typos when I'm live. That's awesome. That he and his wife at the time had only been married during that year, so it listed the years married as 0. The fact that it was a first marriage for both of them, and then the fact that his wife was enumerated in the household with him. Now, as I read over that brief transcription, there's a couple of things that you may have noticed, especially if you're new to family history. A lot of times I get asked questions about, well, I don't know when my ancestor immigrated, or I don't know when my great-grandparents were married. And the thing is that some of that information is on certain census records. And so by transcribing this record, what it does is it forces me to read everything on that document to make sure I've sucked all the information out of that document that I can so that I can move forward. You may also notice here that I have them in chronological order. So it doesn't matter whether I found the 1920 census first or the 1910 census first. I put my notes about them in chronological order. So what happens is, as I'm finding documents, what I'm really doing is creating a little biography of his life. So you can see here, I have the 1910 and 1920 censuses, 1930. I haven't yet discovered the 1940 census, or I haven't looked for him in the 1940 census. And so I might make a little note to myself, again, writing as I go, that I need to look for this particular census. I may even bold it so that it stands out as I'm looking at these notes, so that it becomes almost a working list for me as well, all in one place. I found a 1942 World War II draft card for him. I have some information that we've transcribed out of a family Bible that's in the possession of a great aunt. I have a personal note from my mother from back in 1987 about what she remembered about when her grandfather died. And then, of course, I found him on Find a Grave, and that online memorial contained a copy of his obituary, which I transcribed into the notes as well. So now I have, as I said, almost this mini biography of his life, but then I also have this working document that tells me that I have 3 things very specifically that I still need to find for my great-grandfather. A 1900 census, a World War I draft card, which was either 1917 or 1918, and then that 1940 census. So I write as I go. I know that you know that life gets interrupted on a regular basis. I very rarely sit down and have hours and hours and hours to focus on one person or one family to do the research for them. And so writing as I go enables me to just jump right back in when I come back to this particular ancestor so that I can see where I've been, see what I still need to do, and have a little bit of a picture of his life created as I go. So as you attach those documents, be sure to transcribe them as well and write as you go. Also, don't be afraid to tell the story behind the documents. If you happen to know that who the obituary was written by, maybe you find an obituary and then you discover that your mom tells you that it was written by your Aunt Mary. Make a note of that. That's not on the actual document itself, but that adds to the story. You now know that this information was provided from her perspective. If you've actually accessed an original copy of the document, make a note of that as opposed to accessing an index to the document or an online version of that document. Just tell that story so that you know what the quality is of the records that you're obtaining. Now, another suggestion that I would provide for you for recording your family history is to create a family timeline or a map. Lots of people like that. I love maps. I love the visual of maps, but I'm not terribly creative. And so sometimes the idea of sitting down with a map and trying to plot things and do it that way, it doesn't look pretty enough for me. And I'm a little bit of a perfectionist, but timelines are really simple. And another thing that I would remind you about is that you're not just recording your ancestors' history. You are part of your family history as well. Those who come after you will want to know things about your life. You may even have children or grandchildren living now who want to hear those stories. And it's amazing how quickly those stories get lost or get a little bit scrambled. We were on the phone just last night with my 90-year-old grandmother, and her stories get scrambled up sometimes. But because we've been hearing them for years, we can usually tell where she's mixed something up or inserted an incorrect piece of information. But some of the younger grandchildren and great-grandchildren now might not have that same knowledge. And so record those stories as you hear them. Record those stories from your own life so that they don't get lost. Let me just show you a quick example of two things that I do. So here, you're going to get to see things about me, right? So here is my note section in my family tree. And you can see here that all I've done is just created a very simple timeline with where I was born and then all of the places I've lived. So every time I moved, I just recorded the year and where I moved to. Now that's really simple, and it's something that any one of you could do in just a few minutes. If you want to then expand on it, you can do that. Here's the beautiful thing about writing your family history. You don't have to sit down and do it all at once. I could do this, and then maybe the next time I can come back and I can make notes. Maybe I want to make notes about where I attended school. So I attended Tom McCall Middle School, and I can make a note about that. And then I attended Forest Grove High School, and I can make a note about that. And then when we moved to Washington, I attended West Valley High School, and I can make a note about that, and that's where I graduated from. And I graduated, I will always remember that I graduated on the 1st of June because it was the first of the month. It was an easy date to remember. So I can make those kind of notes. I can make notes about where I attended college. I could make notes about when I moved to California after my first year of college. Well, I moved there to work at Disneyland, and I can make a note about that. You'll see it's all just this little simple things that I can do just to write quick little things about my life. Now, I can then go back and maybe there was a story about that summer I worked at Disneyland. There happened to be several stories about that summer, but maybe I want to then take that and write, in a separate, maybe like in a Word document, write a 1 or 2 page story about an event or about my experiences that summer. Maybe I want to include things about, when my brothers and sisters were born in my timeline. where I can add that information and then maybe write my memories about that event, about what I remember from when he was born. So again, you're just creating a simple timeline. And then as you have time, or maybe you set aside, maybe for 1 hour every Sunday afternoon, you're going to sit down and record your personal history. It takes the pressure off if you don't have to, if you don't feel like you have to sit down and write it all at once. And because this is very personal, this isn't the kind of thing that most of you are going to want to blog about, but you do want to record it. As I said, you want it for your own personal memories, but you're also going to want to pass that on to your children and grandchildren. Can you imagine if every one of our ancestors, or even if just your grandparents and great-grandparents, had taken the time to do this same exercise? So don't forget that your personal history is part of your family history as well. Now, when we talk about family history, we can do a similar thing with our ancestors' lives. So here's another one of my great-grandfathers, and here are the notes that I've collected. And you'll see I have the transcribed documents. Here's a census record. Here's a marriage record. Now here, I've made a note in his timeline. His first son was born in 1908. And so I just inserted that right in there between the 1906 marriage and the 1910 census. Not only does, like I said, this give you a view of their life or a little biography of their life, but you also start to see patterns. For example, he had one child born 2 years after he was married, actually about 1 year and 2 months after he was married. Then after the 1910 census, there was a child born in 1910, 1911, 1914, 1916, and then there's his World War I draft card. Sometimes that World War I draft card will list the number of dependents. And you can go back really quickly in just this one view and look and determine, hey, you know what? I only have 4 children listed and a wife, and he lists a wife and 5 children as dependents. Who am I missing? So you start to, with this kind of writing and this kind of view, you start to be able to determine if you found the correct person on a document. Sometimes we find a document, we think it's for our person because it has limited information, when in reality it's for someone with a similar name or a same name, living in the same place, who's about the same age, and that happens far more often than you might believe. So this view doesn't just help you tell their story, it also helps you determine if you have the right person, if you're tracking the right ancestors. So one of the things you might notice, if you can see this clearly, is not only do I have the transcribed documents, but now I have put the notes that I've entered for their timeline, I've just italicized them so that I can tell them apart really quickly. Remember on the last view of my other great-grandfather, if it was a to-do, I bolded it, and if it's a note I've added, I italicize it. That's just how I do it. You figure out what works for you, but spend some time maybe, I use this word a lot, playing around with it. Be a little brave and a little bit bold, and don't be afraid to play around with your software and see what it can do. Now, for those of you who don't have Family Tree Maker, who only have an online tree on Ancestry.com, you can do this same thing. So if I come over here to Ancestry, and I come to that same great-grandfather, and I'm going to view his profile, because I have my tree synced with my Family Tree Maker, these two things always reflect the same information. And for notes are right here in Family Tree Maker. And now you'll see here the notes are here. Here's a couple of small differences, however. First of all, there's no formatting of the notes in your online tree. So in Family Tree Maker, I can bold and I can italicize, and I can use some of those features. I can increase the font size, all sorts of things to help make it useful, not just as a writing and recording tool, but also as a research tool for myself. In your online tree, you don't have some of that same ability. You can edit the note, you can add to it or change things, and then it will sync back with your Family Tree Maker software, but there's no way to enhance or change fonts. So it's kind of a flat view. Just a side note about these notes on people in your online tree. If your tree is public, nobody can see the notes that you've entered. So the notes remain private, even if the person is deceased, unless you've invited someone specifically to be an editor on your tree. Nobody else can see these notes. Now you can add comments and they can see those, or you can, the comment section down here, or what you can do, and I've just started doing this, I can take these notes and I can copy and paste them into the media gallery as a story. So once I've maybe finished all of the research on a particular person and I have their complete timeline of information and I've found every possible document about them, maybe I just want to copy those notes and paste them into a story so that then everybody who comes to view that person on my tree can view that document or those notes. Just a suggestion. You figure out what works best for you. So create that family timeliner map. Remember to do it for yourself, not just for your ancestors, because you are part of your family history. And include maybe places that they lived, major family events that occurred. Even for our ancestors, we can sometimes dig into reasons why they moved. So for example, I have a family that left Kentucky in 1812 and moved to Arkansas. And I've always, kind of speculated about what caused certain people just to pack up and move. And this wasn't just one family that set off to, claim their fortune. This was the entire extended family, the parents, the grandparents, the children, all the married children and their children, the cousins and the brothers and sisters. This entire family group just picked up and moved. Well, I started digging into history a little bit and discovered that there was a major earthquake in Kentucky in 1812. So major that for people who had never experienced something like that, that might have really freaked them out. And so I've made a little note on each of those families that moved, just noting that there was this earthquake that occurred in 1812, and that I suspect that might have had something to do with why they moved. Maybe there was a drought and they were farmers and they needed to find more fertile land. Maybe there was a rift in the family. All of those are things that you'd be surprised what you can discover as you start digging into the history behind it. And then make little notes to yourself so that you remember what you've researched, and also so that family story becomes a little bit richer. You might be surprised what members of your family want to read that story or hear those stories. People who may not normally even be interested in family history, because for them, family history has always been viewed as, as a very dry, boring, names and dates on a chart kind of thing. But all of a sudden you've made it come alive now because you've added a sentence or two into those notes. A couple more things I just want to share with you. One of the things you can do is you can collect mementos and tell their story. We've talked about this before, so I'll just touch on it briefly, but collect photos and maybe sit down with an aunt or a grandmother or even your grandchildren with one or two photos and tell the story of that photo. And then be sure to record that. Either record it via audio or video, or write it down. Write down those wonderful stories about what was happening in this photo, or what happened immediately before the photo. Look at recipes. One of the treasures that I have in my life is a notebook full of recipes that my mother and I took and digitized, and they're all a lot of them are handwritten. Both of my grandmothers in their handwriting. One of my great-grandfathers, one of my great-grandmothers, we have their handwriting on these old recipe cards. And my mom took those after we digitized them or copied them and put them all together in these gorgeous notebooks that now every one of my brothers and sisters has, so that we can have access to those family recipes. And one of the reasons that it's such a treasure is that in many places, my mom didn't just copy the recipe card. She wrote a little story or a little snippet about why this lemon meringue pie is so famous in our family, or what's so great about the wassail recipe or the minestrone soup. And now you're all hungry, so we'll move on. Let's talk about documents for just a second. I've told you this story before, but I'm going to share it again because it's that significant. I still remember when I took the 1930 census, printed it out, and showed it to my grandmother. She was 8 years old the year that census was taken, and I showed it to her, and she said, oh, well, that's nice. But then all of a sudden she started looking at some of the names of some of the other families on that page. Those were her neighbors growing up. And all of a sudden, she started telling stories that I had never heard before. And this is from a woman who oftentimes tells the same stories twice in a single conversation. So for her to tell new stories was so exciting for me, to hear things about her childhood that I had never heard, and to learn more things about her and the people she had grown up with. So don't just have those experiences, as precious as they are. Record those experiences. And so the final thing I want to share with you today is just the tools that are available to you to record and to keep those family stories safe. You have the ability through your smartphones, through your laptops, maybe it's just an old digital recorder, whatever, to record these conversations, to record these stories. It doesn't have to be a formal interview. Oftentimes we think about that. I have to interview my relatives to get the family stories. No, I have a video that I took the first time that my niece, she was born in Korea, her parents were in the military, and they brought her over to the United States to my grandmother's house. And I just took video, about 20 minutes of it, on the back porch while everybody was eating lunch one day. And that is so fun to me. Nobody was being interviewed. Nobody spoke directly to the camera, but I've captured their faces. I've captured their voices. I've captured the funny teasing that went on between my dad and his brother, and my brother and my dad, and my niece and my brother, like all these little family dynamics and interactions. And that is so precious to me to have that. Recently, we also digitized my grandmother's old 8mm, I think that's what they were, reeled home movies. And there's no sound, but all of a sudden now we have access to, and anybody in the family has access to, these videos that one of them is my great-grandparents at my grandmother's house with my grandmother's brothers and sisters. My dad was probably 9 or 10 years old, and they're eating Easter dinner on the patio. And there's these moving pictures now of people that I know and love now, and people that I never knew, that I never had the opportunity to know in life. So you can take any of those audio or video recordings, and you can attach them to people in your online tree or in Family Tree Maker. Now, I would encourage you to keep those audio and video files kind of short. If you have to break them up, like my 20-minute video, when I attach it, I'll probably have to break it up into a few different files. But then I can attach a single file to multiple people. So here's where you're going to do that in your online tree. You just come in here to the person profile, and you click on the media gallery. And over here you have the option to add media. So you can upload media from your computer. So if you've created a audio file or a video file on your phone, you can copy it to your computer and then upload it. If you've created it on a digital recorder, or if you've got old home movies that you've digitized, any of that, you can just upload it directly from your computer. You also have the option to record audio or video directly from your computer if your computer allows that. So for example, I have a camera and a microphone in my laptop. I could just set my laptop on the table and record either audio or video to then upload directly to the tree. And then once I've done that, I can then attach it, if it's my grandfather and his wife and their kids, I can attach that one file to multiple people. I can do the same thing in Family Tree Maker. You just come here to this little media link. You have the option to add new media, and then you can just copy whatever kind of a file you want to copy. We oftentimes just think about photos or documents, but you can see here it accepts WAV files and MP3 files, so audio, video, any of that can be uploaded and then attached to multiple people in your tree. So I hope you'll take advantage of some of those features. They're just really great ways to not just record your family story in written form, but also in audio, video. When you do those audio and video files, particularly those audio files, I would also encourage you to just transcribe those files if you can. That guarantees that they're preserved a little bit longer. And if it was a family interview situation, that makes sure that you get all the information out of that interview and get it recorded into your family history program. Now, your homework is to go and write a family story. It doesn't have to be long. Maybe it's just a few sentences. Maybe it's creating your own timeline, but do something. I would encourage you to do something today or this week while we have a little bit of downtime before the new year begins. And you'll be surprised maybe at how quickly those family stories grow. That's all we have time for today. If you have any questions or would like to see topics discussed in future episodes, feel free to email me at ask@ancestry.com. If you include a specific research question or challenge, that helps me focus my presentations a little bit better and hopefully make them more useful to you. Our schedule of events can be found on the Ancestry.com Facebook page. There's an events tab there, and you can see all the topics, dates, and times for future live stream presentations. We do have the January calendar finished, and I will be uploading that today. So look for that later today so you can see all of the events scheduled for January and RSVP for the ones that are of interest to you. If you're new to us, we're glad you joined us. You can catch past presentations on our YouTube channel at youtube.com/user/ancestrycom. Until next time, this is Crista Cowan. Have fun climbing your family tree.